The denial of the English as an ethnic group is the viewpoint of the current Home Secretary, Shabana Mahmood. She was recently interviewed by Trevor Phillips for Sky News, and she said the following.
Is what you set out today, you say, is a Labour immigration policy, and it means, in your mind, that people like your parents who play by the rules can find a home in this country, and that their children can, and this is an interesting word, their children can unthinkingly call themselves English. Do you personally, without reservation or hesitation, call yourself English?
Yes. That's why I put that in the speech, because it's never occurred to me that I'm not. I very much identify with being somebody who's a Brummie. I think Birmingham is one of the best of the English cities, and I consider myself English as well as British as well. I know that sometimes people use English to mean slightly different things, but for me, my identity, being someone who's born and lived in England all my life, that's who I am.
So, in minority homes, generally speaking, English usually means white. From your point of view, you've gone past that. I think
definitely when I was younger, everybody would have said if you're saying someone is English, what you really mean is they're white. I think that is a little bit less true today, as more of us are settled in England. As you've seen the rise of sort of Scottish civic identity and Welsh civic identity. If England were playing Scotland, in a football match, I know who I'm supporting. I wouldn't even think twice about supporting anyone other than England.
And if they're playing Pakistan at cricket?
Exactly the same. England all the way. So because of that, I think over the last few years, you've seen more of a sense of confidence amongst minority communities to consider themselves English. But also, I think English is not a race identity so much as it is a civic and national identity. And that is definitely the perspective I have of it.
Let's analyse this for a minute. Here we have two people, neither of whom have any English ancestry at all, discussing in British media whether or not one of them is English. For clarity, Trevor Phillips' parents are both from Guyana, and Shabana Mahmood's parents are Mirpuri Pakistanis. They were both born and raised in England, but themselves are clearly not English. To say that something is English is to say that it belongs to the English people. The English people are an ethnic group which is native to England. England itself is named after the English people, who are the product of the mixture of the Anglo-Saxons and the native Britons. English people carry this shared ancestry and can be objectively identified in a number of ways. Historical records, archaeology, and modern genetic testing all bear this out. Ethnicity is inherited. That is, you receive your ethnic background ancestrally from your parents, and it is immutable. You cannot change your ethnicity. You are a member of the ethnic groups from which your parents came, and you have no choice in the matter. Your only choice is whether you socially adhere to your ancestral ethnic group or not. You could, of course, just leave, and many people do, but it's interesting to note that when they do move to another country, they tend to congregate with people like themselves, because it is clear that ethnicity is the root of belonging. Belonging can be achieved in many ways, which I have explored elsewhere, so I'm not going to go into it now. But ethnicity is the fundamental bedrock upon which culture, customs, and nations are built. The ethnic group is the background assumption and foundation stone of belonging. It is the thing that people like Mahmood and Phillips are trying to belong to, which is why they are attempting to acquire the label English for themselves. This question of belonging is one of the primary problems of modernity. Mass immigration, liberal ideology, and the repressive culture of political correctness have combined to cast something of an illusion over our own perceptions of what is and what is not, and many people find themselves without the philosophical toolkit to adequately express what they know to be true. For example, it would not be particularly strange for Mahmood to say, "I am a British-born Pakistani woman and I have lived here my whole life." Everyone would agree and get on with their day. If she had said, "I am culturally English because I was raised in England," everyone would nod and agree. These would be uncontestably true statements of fact. But instead, Mahmood has decided to make metaphysical and ontological claims that are not just highly contestable, but are also clearly wrong. By determining that she is English, that is, she belongs to the English ethnic group and therefore can speak for it, she attempts to decouple the group from its own cultural and political products and seeks to claim them for herself. Not only is her ontological claim incorrect by any objective measure, in the process she is exploding the metaphysical category of English by destroying its boundaries. If one does not require English heritage and membership of the English community to be English, what does English even mean? It seems that you have liquidated the concept of the English nation. This is quite alarming because the English are the indigenous ethnic group of England, and ethnic groups have a collective heritage with rights and entitlements. These collective rights are recognised by the United Nations in their 2007 resolution, which accepted the UN's Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. As they tell us, the Declaration states that it is recognising and reaffirming that Indigenous individuals are entitled without discrimination to all human rights recognised in international law, and that Indigenous peoples possess collective rights which are indispensable for their existence, well-being, and integral development as peoples. I agree with these enunciated rights, and wonder why they ought to be reserved for some special subordinate category of people. Do not all groups of people deserve to have their collective rights recognised, since they are indispensable for their existence? Every people has some kind of indigenous homeland. Why ought they not all be able to claim access to these protections? Moreover, for the category of indigenous peoples, it is the definition of which that is most pernicious, because of its absence. As the UN tells us, the UN Declaration on the Right of Indigenous Peoples does not include a definition of indigenous peoples. According to the Declaration, self-identification as indigenous is considered a fundamental criterion. The Declaration refers to their right to determine their own identity or membership in accordance with their customs and traditions. This definition is, of course, not sufficient for the task it has set itself. If the UN cannot define an indigenous person, and the matter is left to self-identification, why can't anyone just identify however they like? This is the same belief that transgender activists have regarding women applied to nationhood.
You can be English with roots here that stretch back 1,000 years, but you can also be English and look like me.
Even then, though, somehow the UN manages to exclude all of Europe from having any indigenous peoples at all. Where do the Europeans come from, if not Europe? Why can we not simply identify as being indigenous to Europe, since that's all that's required to do so? The answer would surely be found in my objection to Shabana Mahmood calling herself English. It would explode the category if we drew no firm borders around it. And if we draw firm borders around it, some people who currently inhabit Europe will be recognised to be non-indigenous.
Patriotism, a force for good, is turning into something smaller, something more like ethno-nationalism, which struggles to accept that someone who looks like me and has a faith like mine can truly be English or British.
In 2009, 125 parliamentarians from the Labour, Conservative and Liberal Democrat parties signed a motion called The Rights of Tribal and Indigenous Peoples, which stipulated that there are no indigenous peoples in the United Kingdom. This might seem like ancient history, but many of these characters are still around and in Parliament now, such as Jeremy Corbyn, Diane Abbott, John McDonnell, Baroness Hoey, and the current Speaker of the House, Sir Lindsay Hoyle. For some reason, a significant section of the Parliament at that time felt that the ancient nations of the British Isles had no claim on the land, history, achievements and culture of these isles, and that they weren't reserved for only them and no other peoples. And this is in spite of the fact that the UN does give us a pseudo-definition of indigenous that would accurately characterise the peoples of Europe as indigenous and native to their own continent, which of course they are. As the UN tells us, Indigenous peoples have in common a historical continuity with a given region prior to colonization and a strong link to their lands. They maintain, at least in part, distinct social, economic and political systems. They have distinctive languages, cultures, beliefs and knowledge systems. They are determined to maintain and develop their identity in distinct institutions, and they form a non-dominant sector of society. It is only this last part of the definition that does not apply to the native people of the British Isles, that they form a non-dominant sector of society, and that's only for now. As we know, immigration is changing the ethnic makeup of Britain, and we are forecast to become a minority on our ancestral homeland as early as 2063. That's less than 40 years away. This might have felt irrelevant in 2009, but since the long process of foreign colonisation in Britain has continued at an accelerated rate, it becomes all the more salient in 2026. If we cannot conceptually identify ourselves as a group which has a claim to a land, then what are we? Where are we from? By what metric do we even exist? And if we had the grace of being considered of this land, then this would be in violation of Articles 9 and 10 of the Charter, which says Indigenous peoples and individuals have the right to belong to an Indigenous community or nation in accordance with the traditions and customs of the community or nation concerned, and Indigenous peoples shall not be forcibly removed from their lands or territories. If you obliterate the categories of native Britons and non-native people, the indigenous ethnic groups of the British Isles conceptually disappear, and through semantics you have created an empty frontier that is ready to be colonised. That is what Shabana Mahmood is doing to us, as she herself put it.
English usually means white. From your point of view, you've gone past that.
I think definitely when I was younger, everybody would have said if you're saying someone is English, what you really mean is they're white. I think that is a little bit less true today, as more of us are settled in England.
The language she has used here is particularly revealing. As she said, if you're saying someone is English, you are saying they are white. I think that's a little bit less true, as there are more of us settled in England. Well, who is us in this formulation? Clearly, it must be referring to people who are not ethnically English, being settled from abroad, and this collective self-identification is juxtaposed against the indigenous population. This is the language of colonization, and she has accidentally revealed that she understands herself to be in some way foreign, and that the us to which she belongs has been planted here against our will. Once the ethnic group of the English has been conceptually abolished, the term English is derived only from the land itself. However, this puts us in a logically inconsistent place. Unlike the countries of the New World, the land of England is named because of its occupation by the English people. Now, however, Mahmood explains to us how English as an identity becomes detached from a people, and becomes merely a geographic term that does not describe lineage or ancestry, but is instead just a location, becoming a civic identity.
As you've seen the rise of sort of Scottish civic identity and Welsh civic identity, I think over the last few years, you've seen more of a sense of confidence amongst minority communities to consider themselves English. But also I think English is not a race identity so much as it is a civic and national identity. And that is definitely the perspective I have of it.
This statement is a denial of Article 33 of the Declaration, which states, Indigenous peoples have the right to determine their own identity or membership in accordance with their customs and traditions. According to the UN Declaration, identity is done entirely through self-identification, so Mahmood literally has no standing to be able to strip us of our identity because she is literally not an English person. But not only is this non-English government minister denying us the right to determine who we even are, she has since gone further and abolished the concept of English ethnicity itself by deconstructing the boundaries of the category, and this thrusts her into another confusing world of abstractions. One might ask, then, if there is some kind of free-floating civic identity that is available to all, why call it English? How is it parochial to any group, and how do you differentiate it from other civic identities? What use is it if there is no underlying ethnic group whose practices in social and political life it is meant to encapsulate? What makes it particular to this place, if not the people from which it has been taken? And if it is particular to the people here, what right do you have to dispossess us of it? By stripping the civic life away from the ethnic group that created it, you are not only stealing a story that isn't yours, but you begin to deprive the people to whom it belongs of their most cherished ancestral inheritance so that you can give it away to others.
Islam, my own religion, like a lot of practicing Muslims, my faith is the most important thing in my life. It is the absolute driver of everything that I do.
Once this conceptual feat has been accomplished, it is full steam ahead at decolonizing England from its English inheritance. Since the English have no claim to England, there is no moral reason to restrain ourselves from deconstructing anything that has an English ethnic character. And we have seen this in academia, in which, say, Oxford University, the world's second oldest university, whose roots stretch back into Anglo-Saxon England, must be cleansed of its English influence. This, of course, makes no sense, because Oxford University is an indigenous English institution. In fact, attacking this heritage would be in violation of Article 14 of the Declaration, which states, "Indigenous peoples have the right to establish and control their educational systems and institutions, providing education in their own languages in a manner appropriate to their cultural methods of teaching and learning." Naturally, then, the conceptual attack on the English people must go further, with academics laying the groundwork for this ethnocide. Cambridge University, the world's third oldest university, and again another indigenous English institution, has decided to teach its students that Anglo-Saxons did not even exist in an effort to impose anti-racism on yet another venerable English institution by deconstructing the concept of an English identity altogether. But it's not just limited to us alone. As they say, the department's approach also aims to show that there were never coherent Scottish, Irish and Welsh identities either. It isn't enough that the English ethnicity has to be abolished, but it also has to be that the Welsh, Scottish and Irish ethnicities must be abolished as well, to ensure that the full extent of the British Isles can be given over to foreign peoples. Despite all of this, we are still somehow paying the Danegeld though. In her role as Home Secretary, Shabana Mahmood has decided that she will give £10,000 to foreign invaders, most of whom are Muslims, in order to leave peacefully. This could be up to £40,000 per family, in the vain hope that they won't see this in exactly the same way the Vikings saw it, and go home with our riches to tell their friends that we are just handing out money. I am certain that what this will do now is what it did in the time of Ethelred the Unready, which is to incentivise other invaders to come here. But I suppose Mahmood forgot this inherited wisdom of her English identity. But what is even the point, though?
Some say, in response, that we should turn to the path proposed by the Greens, that we should create a world without borders, that nation-states are social constructs, and that patriotism is a dirty word. To some, these might seem like harmless student politics, but the danger and the possible damage is real. A party leader who seeks the highest office in the land should not be on the beaches of France helping migrants onto small boats, encouraging them to make a perilous crossing. And what he did personally, his policies would do many times over, creating further incentives to come to this country illegally and increasing the already vast burden placed on taxpayers in this country.
She claims to wish to end the fairy tale of open borders, but it is this same fairy tale that brought her here in the first place, and why, as she said, so many of us are settled here. Mahmood says she wants to send refugees home, but her objection to them being here is legal rather than moral, and speaks entirely to securing the integrity of the British state that is using foreign peoples to colonise our country, rather than the integrity of the indigenous communities of Britain in their ancestral lands. Moreover, this is criticised by fellow Mirpuri Muslim colonist Zara Sultana. As she put it, Mahmud is kicking away the ladder, in that Mahmud is refusing their ethnic and religious compatriots access to this new frontier. How dare Mahmud do this? And from their own perspective, how is Sultana wrong? If herself and Mahmud are allowed access to this land and can be given power over it, despite both being Mirpuri Pakistani women, why not others? What is the legitimacy to prevent other people from enjoying what they were given? Their presence as politicians and members of government itself would seem to contradict Article 18 of the Declaration, which states, "Indigenous peoples have the right to participate in decision-making in matters which would affect their rights, through representatives chosen by themselves in accordance with their own procedures." Well, we didn't elect these people. These people were elected through their co-ethnics voting in their separate enclaves. The existence of these enclaves themselves is in violation of Article 26 of the Declaration, which states, "Indigenous peoples have the right to the lands, territories and resources which they have traditionally owned, occupied, or otherwise used or acquired." What this all shows us is that these foreigners view us as a treasure trove to be looted, overtaken and colonised. Preventing an infinite inflow of foreigners is, to them, immoral. This non-particular interpretation of the people of Britain has pervaded almost the entirety of the political environment of the country. Zach Polanski, Keir Starmer, Kemi Badenoch, and even Nigel Farage all agree with the fundamental point that there isn't really an indigenous population of Britain that have a claim on the country through their ancestry and inheritance. For example, Reform UK has promised to prioritise Welsh people in Wales, which sounds like a good idea and really ought to be the default position for each country on earth. But what is a Welsh person? Well, Farage himself has the same globalist interpretation shared by Mahmud: anyone who has been allowed to live in Wales for a certain period of time.
You say that you would like to give priority to people from Wales for housing. How would you define a Welsh person?
Well, it's a very fair question from your channel. We hadn't proposed the Welsh language test. No, look, it's got to be somebody who's lived and is settled in Wales, has paid taxes and obeyed the law. And if someone's done that for a 5 or 10 year period, then I think they've every right to say that they're fully part of the Welsh community.
As far as he is concerned, anyone can be Welsh as long as the state allows them to be Welsh. Moreover, when the problems this state of affairs presents are raised by the native population, they have long been ignored or suppressed by the multicultural state, which intends for this to be the condition of the country forever.
Sarah, can you tell us the names of the three people in Glasgow who were murdered by the Muslim asylum seeker? Can you tell us what happened with the rapes of children in Glasgow from fake asylum seekers who were raping kids, and then it was covered up by the actual...
I think you should take your far-right nonsense somewhere else.
At its best, it is the vicissitudes of immigration that are stigmatised as far-right and ignored by polite society. And at its worst, there is an active cover-up and suppression of the English people as they are raped, murdered and dispossessed by the people who have been inflicted upon them. All of this, of course, would violate not only the most basic human rights to safety, but also Article 3 of the UN's Declaration, the right to self-determination. Indigenous peoples have the right to self-determination. By virtue of that right, they freely determine their political status and freely pursue their economic, social and cultural development. The indigenous English population of Britain does not seem to have representation in their own political system. The Celtic nations might have their devolved parliaments and civic identities, which at least pay lip service to representing native interests, even if they don't, but the English are not even entitled to that. Not only is the English identity colonised by foreigners, but the English Parliament is still occupied by the British Empire. Moreover, the British state seems hell-bent on protecting its new arrivals at the expense of the native population.
By contribution that Muslims make to Britain's story and to our national life. That is how it's defined. In business, in art, in education, in public service. You're the face of modern Britain.
Huge amounts of public money are spent feeding, housing and taking care of these foreign communities, to the extent that there apparently will be an anti-Islamophobia czar, some kind of Islamic inquisitor, who will keep a watchful eye on the insolent indigenous populations to ensure that they are kept in their place with the full force of the law.
Be in no doubt, those that have participated in this violence will face the full force of the law. The police will be making arrests, individuals will be held on remand, charges will follow, and convictions will follow. I guarantee you will regret taking part in this disorder, whether directly or those whipping up this action online.
To describe what is happening to us as a cruelty is simply not sufficient to explain the depths of suffering, anguish and betrayal that we currently exist under. Any serious thinker who spends any amount of time pondering the nightmare we have found ourselves in must surely find the situation bleak. I think it is this perspective that underpins the fact that both the British government and a third of the country are expecting a civil war to break out within the next 5 years. The tensions are there, everyone can feel them, and the state that ought to be our political representation instead seems hell-bent on our destruction. This should probably be expected, given how New Labour began the programme of mass immigration with the express purpose of destroying the ethnic homogeneity of Britain, turning us into a multicultural country to rub our noses in diversity. The entire project appears to have been malevolent, driven by a resentful hatred of the indigenous people of these islands, and with the sole purpose of making them suffer for the success of their ancestors. The only political party in Britain that seems to have cottoned on to the depth of this problem is Rupert Lowe's Restore Britain. I have joined it, and if you were in Britain, I encourage you to join it as well. I'll leave a link in the description.